With question 46 of Prima Secunda, we are now in our final three questions of this treatise on the passions, and working now through the irascible passions. And the fifth of the irascible passions, and the passion that will be the topic of the last three questions here in this treatise, is anger. And it's a very interesting irascible passion because it does not have an opposite. It's the only passion of the 11 that St. Thomas Aquinas talks about that does not have an opposite. And I will say that in my teaching of the Summa Theologia to high school students, the irascible passions has been one of the most difficult things for me to explain how they're different from the concupiscible. But this question, these 8 articles, has really made it a lot easier for me to understand what exactly is the difference. And so we'll get right to it. Article 1 of 8 says whether anger is a special passion. And he says, anger may be called a general passion, inasmuch as it is caused by a concurrence of several passions, because the movement of anger does not arise save on account of some pain inflicted, and unless save on account of some pain inflicted, and unless there be desire and hope, next page, of revenge. For Aristotle says the angry man hopes to punish, since he craves for revenge as being possible. Consequently, if the person who inflicted the injury excels very much, anger does not ensue, but only sorrow, as Avicenna said. So right here in Article 1, he's beginning to show what is unique about anger is that it is a convergence of really two different passions, I guess you could say. Is that you first of all have, in a sense, like almost like a hatred, or there's an evil that you desire for somebody, but then on the other hand, there's a vengeance, which is good because there's going to some element of justice that comes about from it. Article 2, whether the object of anger is good or evil, and this is where he's going to explain this. He says, when a man is angry, he wishes to be avenged on someone. Hence, the movement of anger has a twofold tendency. That is, to vengeance itself, which it desires and hopes for as a good, wherefore it takes pleasure in it, and to the person on whom it seeks vengeance as to something contrary and hurtful, which bears the character of evil. Now, I know it sounds weird to desire evil for somebody, but you got to understand it in the context of what Aquinas is talking about, is that you wish evil, but it's in a good because the vengeance is going to seek justice in the end, and that's why the anger is going to be an irascible rather than a concupiscible, which is what Article 3 is about. Is it in the concupiscible faculty? Now, you remember the concupiscible has 6 couplets or 6 pairs. You have love and hatred, and you have desire and aversion, and then joy and sorrow. And then in the irascibles, you have hope and despair, fear and daring, and anger. So we know it's not a concupiscible passion, but Thomas says the passions of the irascible part differ from the passions of the concupiscible faculty in that the objects of the concupiscible passions are good and evil absolutely considered, whereas the objects of the irascible passions are good and evil in a certain elevation or arduousness. Anger regards 2 objects, that is, vengeance that it seeks and the person on whom it seeks vengeance, and in respect of both, anger requires a certain arduousness, for the movement of anger does not arise unless there be some magnitude about both these objects, since we make no ado about things that are not or very minute, as the philosopher observes. Okay, so this is what's kind of arduous about it, is that first of all, you've got 2 different things coming together, and they're both kind of challenging. Okay, it's not real simple, it's not real cut and dry like the concupiscible passions would be. All right, does anger require an act of reason? And Thomas is going to say here, I'll just kind of paraphrase, that yes, in a sense it does, because you have to look at 2 different things. You have to look at the person that you're angry at and then seeking vengeance, and it takes some mental activity to kind of figure out what you're going to do and whether it's just, okay? But the question that I thought of when I saw this is, can't irrational creatures like dogs and cats and grizzly bears get angry? But I think when he talks about it requires an act of reason in a fashion, I think, and I'd have to read all the objections and the answers to the objections to see that I think he's saying really there's a uniqueness to the human person when it comes to anger being something that's reasonable or having to do with a rational faculty. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. Article 5, is anger more natural than desire? Now, this is very interesting because you might think, well, I think desire is more natural. I desire food, I desire drink and sleep. I don't always get angry. But he says, the cause of a passion may be considered in two ways. First, on the part of the object. Secondly, on the part of the subject. We are the subject of anger, right? If we consider the cause of anger and of desire on the part of the object, thus desire, especially of pleasures of the table and of sexual pleasures, are more natural than anger, insofar as these pleasures are more natural to man than vengeance. Okay, so he's acknowledging the fact that it's more common for us to have desires of the flesh than to get angry. But the distinction he makes is that we are rational creatures, and therefore it's more natural for us because, as he already said, anger has to do with reason, that it's more part of who we are than the dog or the cat to be angry because it's associated with reason, and therefore in that regard it is more natural. Okay, so Article 6 says whether anger is more grievous than hatred. He says the species and nature of a passion are taken from its object. Now, the object of anger is the same in substance as the object of hatred, since just as the hater wishes evil to him who he hates, so does the angry man wish evil to him who he is angry. So what he's going to say here is that in both anger and hatred, you wish evil upon a person. But in hatred, you wish evil for evil's sake. There's nothing good about hatred. But with anger, you're wishing evil because of vengeance and for a seeking of justice. And so therefore, anger is not as bad as hatred. If you hate somebody, that's really bad. If you're angry, then you may be seeking justice. Okay, whether anger is only towards those to whom one has an obligation of justice, this is kind of a weird question, and the answer is yes. I'll just leave it at that. He says yes, but I don't think it's one of the more important articles. And then finally, whether the species of anger are suitably assigned. And he says here, the species of anger given by Damascene and Gregory of Nyssa are taken from those things which give increased anger. This happens in three ways. First, from facility of the movement itself, and he calls this kind of anger bile because it is quickly aroused. Okay, when we get angry, we get quickly aroused. Secondly, on the part of the grief that causes anger and which dwells some time in the memory, and this belongs to ill will, which is derived from to dwell. Okay, so it stays with us. Thirdly, on the part of that which the angry man seeks, which is vengeance, and this pertains to rancor, which never rests until it is avenged. And then he quotes Ephesians 4:31, let all bitterness and anger and indignation be put away from you. Hence, he says, to close out this question and article, the philosopher calls some angry persons choleric because they are easily angered. Some he calls bitter because they retain their anger for a long time, and some he calls ill-tempered because they never rest until they have retaliated. All right, so those are the 8 articles of this 46th question of Prima Secunda on the irascible passion of anger. Thanks for joining me. God bless you.